fluorescent hum of the laundromat at 4 a.m., one machine running on empty, was the only sound I could hear over the thrumming in my ears. My fingers, stained a faint, persistent blue from the ink of countless rejected applications, traced the condensation on the grimy glass of the washing machine. It spun, a solitary, churning vortex of nothing, just like my life. Each revolution felt like another wasted day, another dollar bled into the insatiable maw of necessity. Rent was due. The fridge was a graveyard of wilted vegetables and regret. My landlord's voice, a gravelly rasp, echoed in my memory, promising eviction with unsettling cheerfulness. Then the letter arrived. Thick cream-colored parchment, embossed with a crest I didn't recognize. It felt impossibly heavy in my hands, a stark contrast to the flimsy envelopes I'd grown accustomed to. The return address was a smudge of an ink that bled into the paper, illegible. Inside, the words were formal, almost archaic. A lawyer, a Mr. Seelerscroft, informed me of the passing of a distant relative, a great Aunt Alara whom I'd never met. And then the bombshell, I, Raj, was the sole heir to his estate, an estate described as substantial and secluded. The word substantial was underlined twice. I reread that part a dozen times. Substantial, wealth. It was a fantasy I'd long since buried under layers of practical despair. Ilara. The name meant nothing. I'd spent my childhood bouncing between foster homes, a ghost in the system, with no family tree to speak of. This Ilara was a phantom limb, a forgotten branch on a tree I never knew existed. The will itself, a separate document attached, was even more peculiar. It wasn't just a transfer of property. There were conditions, vague, unsettling conditions. I was to take possession of the estate within 30 days of receiving the notification. I was to reside there alone for a period of no less than 1 year. Failure to comply meant forfeiture, forfeiture of everything. The lawyer's contact information was sparse. A post office box number, no phone number, a deliberate, almost theatrical obscurity. I tried calling the general number listed for the law firm. A recorded message, clipped and emotionless, informed me that Mr. Croft was unavailable and all correspondence should be directed via mail. It felt like a game, a test. But the promise of substantial wealth, of escaping this perpetual gray, was a siren song I couldn't ignore. The laundromat's dryer buzzed, a jarring interruption. I pulled out my meager load of clothes, the damp cotton clinging to my skin like a second, unwelcome skin. The air in the small room was thick with the cloying scent of fabric softener and stale sweat. Outside, the streetlights cast long, distorted shadows that writhed and stretched across the wet asphalt. The city was a concrete beast, indifferent to my struggles. This mansion, this inheritance, it was my only chance, a chance to break free, to finally breathe. I imagined the estate, secluded, a place far from the gnawing anxieties of my current existence. A place where I could finally escape the constant hum of failure. The will's cryptic clauses gnawed at me, but the thought of escaping this laundromat, this endless cycle of poverty, was a potent intoxicant. I pictured manicured lawns, towering trees, a quiet solitude that promised peace. Who was she and why me? The questions swirled, but the allure of the unknown, of a life transformed, drowned them out. The next morning I found myself staring at a map, tracing a route that led to a town so small it barely registered on the GPS. The directions were simple enough, provided by Mr. Seelerscroft's terse letter. A long, winding road, then a turn onto an unpaved track. No mention of neighbors, no proximity to anything resembling civilization, just the estate and me. The thought sent a shiver, not entirely unpleasant, down my spine. There was this seclusion a blessing or a trap? The laundromat at 4 a.m., one machine running on empty, spat out a weak, rattling sigh as its cycle concluded. I pulled out a single, faded blue sock. Its mate lost somewhere in the cosmic indifference of the universe, much like my own career prospects. The hum of the machinery was a dull ache behind my eyes, a sound that had become the soundtrack to my life. I stuffed the sock back into my worn canvas bag, the weight of it of everything pressing down. That's when the letter, crisp and stark white against the grimy linoleum, caught my eye. It hadn't been there when I sat down. It was addressed to me in an elegant, spidery script that looked impossibly old. No return address. My name, Raj, was written with an unnerving precision. My hands, still damp from the laundromat's artificial chill, trembled as I unfolded the single sheet of thick parchment. The will, It was the will of a distant great aunt, Elara Thorne, a name I'd never heard until the lawyer's terse phone call. She'd left me everything, not just a sum of money, but a property. Thorne Manor, the letter stated. A place of solitude and inheritance awaits its new master. A place of solitude. The words echoed the hollowness I felt, a desperate invitation to an escape I hadn't realized I craved so deeply. The details were sparse. The lawyer's instructions to meet him at the estate's gates in 3 days' time, to be delivered by a driver he'd arranged. A driver, for me, it felt like a fever dream, a cruel joke the universe was playing. But the paper was real, the ink indelible. A spark, small and fragile, flickered within the desolation. The drive to Thorne Manor was long, the paved road giving way to a rutted, overgrown track that scraped and groaned against the undercarriage of the car. The driver, a silent, stoic man with eyes like chips of obsidian, offered no conversation. The landscape outside grew wilder, denser. Trees, ancient and gnarled, clawed at the bruised twilight sky, their branches like skeletal fingers. Then, through a curtain of mist, it appeared, Thorne Manor. It wasn't just old, it was a wound in the landscape. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something cloying and sweet like decaying flowers. The driver stopped the car with a soft crunch of gravel. He didn't get out. He just gestured towards the massive oak doors, his face unreadable. "Your inheritance," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. The doors creaked open at my touch, a sound that seemed to scrape against my very bones. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom. The grand hall was vast, draped in cobwebs that shimmered like spectral lace. A thick layer of dust lay over everything, muffling my footsteps, swallowing the sound of my own breathing. It was as if the house itself held its breath, waiting. I spent the first night in a vast, cavernous bedroom that smelled faintly of lavender and something metallic, like old blood. The bed was enormous, draped in heavy velvet that felt strangely alive against my skin. Sleep eluded me. Every creak of the ancient timbers, every rustle of unseen things in the walls sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. The wind outside moaned like a lost soul, rattling the leaded glass windows. I told myself it was just the house settling, the wind playing tricks. It was a massive, old building after all. What else could I expect? I found a library, its shelves crammed with leather-bound volumes that crumbled at a touch. In the dining room, a long, polished table was set with tarnished silver, as if awaiting guests who would never arrive. It was in the study, a room dominated by a massive mahogany desk, that I found it. A small, intricately carved wooden box sat on the desk, nestled amongst scattered papers. It was locked. I ran my fingers over its smooth, cool surface, feeling the delicate, unsettling patterns. There was no keyhole. As my fingers traced a particularly elaborate swirl, a faint click echoed from within. The lid sprang open. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a single tarnished silver locket. I opened it. 2 miniature portraits stared back at me. On one side, a stern-faced woman with Elara Thorne's eyes, I presumed. On the other, a man with a cruel smile and eyes that seemed to bore into me, even in their tiny, painted form. I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to slam the box shut, to throw it away, but my hand froze. The man's painted eyes seemed to shift, to wink, or was it just the play of light? Later, as I stood by a window in the grand hall, watching the mist swirl outside, I heard it. A faint melody carried on the wind, or perhaps from within the house itself. It was a lullaby, a haunting, sorrowful tune played on a music box. I'd never heard it before, yet it felt achingly familiar, stirring a forgotten corner of my memory. I followed the sound, my heart thudding a strange, hesitant rhythm against my ribs. It led me to a dusty, disused nursery, its walls adorned with faded, whimsical wallpaper. In the center of the room, on a child-sized rocking chair, sat a small porcelain doll, its painted eyes wide and unblinking. The music box, I realized with a sickening lurch, was nestled in its lap. The doll's painted smile seemed to widen. There was I imagining it. There was the isolation, the sheer strangeness of this place finally getting to me. The lone dryer at the laundromat at 4 a.m., one machine running on empty, finally surrendered its monotonous tumble. A final, pathetic whirring, then silence. I retrieved my laundry, the dampness clinging to my fingers like a second skin. The air in the cavernous space was thick with the metallic tang of detergent and something else, something vaguely organic, like old, wet earth. The fluorescent lights, buzzing with an insistent, sickly yellow, cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe at the edges of my vision. I'd been coming here every few nights, a ritual born of necessity and a desperate attempt to cling to a semblance of normalcy. My own washing machine at the mansion had started acting up, leaking, then emitting a high-pitched whine that vibrated through the floorboards and into my teeth. It was easier to just use the laundromat. Easier and less. Alone, that thought snagged in my mind. Alone. I hadn't spoken to another human being in 3 days. Not since the delivery driver, a burly man with a vacant stare, had deposited a crate of canned goods and a single tarnished silver candelabra on the porch. He hadn't lingered, hadn't met my eye. Just a grunt and the crunch of tires on gravel as he sped away. My phone signal had died 2 days ago, a slow fade like a dying ember. Until now, nothing. The internet, a phantom limb I constantly reached for, was similarly absent. The mansion seemed to actively repel connectivity. I'd tried a portable Wi-Fi hotspot, a booster antenna, even a desperate, shouting call to the internet provider from the highest window. Static was the only reply. Back at the mansion, the silence was a physical weight. It pressed against my eardrums, a low, constant thrum that felt like the house breathing. The air inside was always cool, unnaturally so, even in the late summer heat. It smelled of dust and decay, a cloying sweetness that hinted at things long dead. I set the laundry basket down in the cavernous hall, the polished wood of the floorboards groaning under the slight weight. The candelabra gleamed dully in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. It was heavy, intricately carved with figures that seemed to twist and contort the longer I looked at them. I tried to dismiss them as artistic flourishes, but their eyes, tiny obsidian chips, seemed to follow me. Later in the kitchen, I prepared a meager meal of canned beans. The silence was punctuated by the drip, drip, drip of a leaky faucet, each drop echoing with an unnatural clarity. I found myself listening, really listening, to the sounds of the house. The creaks and groans were no longer just the settling of old timbers. They were deliberate. A soft scuffling from the floor above, like something small and furtive moving across the floorboards. I told myself it was the wind, the old pipes, my own tired mind playing tricks. But the knot in my stomach tightened with each passing moment. I decided to explore the West Wing. The will mentioned a library, a vast collection of books that, according to my distant relatives' strangely specific instructions, held keys to understanding. I'd been avoiding it, a primal instinct screaming at me to stay away. But the isolation was starting to fray my nerves, and the promise of answers, however cryptic, was a powerful lure. As I walked, the temperature plummeted. My breath plumed in the air. The walls were lined with portraits, their subjects obscured by layers of dust and cobwebs. Their painted eyes, though faded, seemed to fix on me, their expressions a mixture of disdain and something akin to hunger. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, as if unseen insects were crawling over me. I swiped at my arm, but there was nothing there. The scuffling sound returned, closer now, just beyond a closed door. I stopped, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the pipes. It was something else. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling. I hesitated. What if it was just a trapped animal, a rat perhaps? It sounded like my name. Distorted, drawn out, laced with an insatiable curiosity. I pulled the door open. The room was bare save for a single ornate mirror propped against the far wall, and it was empty. The glass reflected only the dim light of the corridor, my own pale, anxious face. But as I stared, a flicker of movement caught my eye, not in the reflection but behind it, and then a face, not a human face. It was a contorted mask of fear, contorted with my fear. The sound, though not audible, ripped through my mind. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. The whisper intensified, no longer just my name but a promise of what lay waiting. What was this house truly made of? The damp air of the laundromat clung to me, heavy and cloying, a stark contrast to the biting chill outside. My fingers, still smelling faintly of fabric softener and something else, something metallic and sharp, fumbled with the zipper of my duffel bag. The lone dryer at the laundromat at 4 a.m., one machine running on empty, had finally surrendered its monotonous tumble. The air in the cavernous space was thick with the metallic tang of detergent and stale air, a smell I usually associated with late-night chores and the promise of clean clothes. Tonight, it felt different. It felt like a prelude. My car, parked under the sickly yellow glow of a street lamp, seemed miles away. I kept glancing over my shoulder, an absurd, childish instinct. There was no one there, of course, just rows of silent machines, their metallic bellies empty, waiting, but the feeling persisted, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if I were being watched. It was the same feeling I'd started to get in the mansion, the feeling that the house wasn't just old but aware. Back in my cramped apartment, the scent of the laundromat followed me. I dumped the bag onto the worn rug, the folded clothes a jumbled mess. My mind, however, was already elsewhere. It was back at Blackwood Manor. It was a symphony of subtle disturbances, each one a tiny splinter under my skin. I should have packed up then. I should have driven back to the city, found a cheap motel, and forgotten all about the inheritance, the cryptic will, the promise of wealth that now felt like a trap. But a different kind of hunger had taken root. The house was a puzzle, and I was starting to feel an overwhelming need to solve it, even if the pieces themselves were sharp and dangerous. I pulled out my laptop, the faint blue light a welcome, if insufficient, illumination. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure where to begin. Raj, that was my name, and the name of the man who had left me this legacy, Elias Thorne. The will had been specific, almost poetic in its vagueness. To my dearest kin, Raj, I bequeath the entirety of my estate, Blackwood Manor, and all that resides within its hallowed, or perhaps unhallowed, walls. May you find the solace I never could. Solace. The word felt like a cruel joke now. I started searching online, typing Elias Thorne's name into the search bar. The results were sparse, a few genealogical records, a brief mention in a local historical society newsletter about a reclusive benefactor. Nothing about his life, his work, or why he'd chosen me, a relative he'd never even met. It was as if he'd been deliberately erased from history, leaving only the house as his monument. I closed my eyes, trying to recall every detail, every sensation from my brief stay. The dust motes that seemed to coalesce into fleeting shapes, the overwhelming sense of being observed. I opened my eyes and stared at the screen. My fingers moved, driven by an impulse I couldn't quite control. I described the stained glass in the foyer, the way the light filtered through it, casting distorted, morbid figures on the floor. The metallic smell from the laundromat seemed to resurface, stronger now, tinged with something coppery. I shook my head, trying to clear it. It was just my imagination, fueled by exhaustion and the unsettling atmosphere of the house. But the writing continued, a compulsive outpouring. I detailed the worn velvet of the library chairs, the faint, dry scent of old paper, and something else, something akin to dried flowers, but more pungent, more unsettling. Then I remembered the library, the wall, the scratching. It had been faint, almost imperceptible, easily dismissed as mice or the settling of an old house, but it had been too rhythmic, too deliberate. I'd pressed my ear against the cool, rough plaster, straining to hear. It had stopped the moment I touched the wall. My heart rate quickened. I could feel the blood pulsing in my temples. Was it still there? Was it waiting for me to return? I typed faster, the words tumbling out, a desperate chronicle of my growing unease. I described the recurring dream, the one where I was trapped in a vast labyrinthine cellar, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay, and the sound of something heavy dragging itself across the stone floor, always just out of sight. The house was more than just a dwelling. It was a presence, and it was reaching for me, even here, miles away. It was feeding on my fear, on my curiosity, weaving itself into the fabric of my thoughts. My gaze fell on a photograph I'd taken on my phone before leaving the manor. It was of a large, ornate mirror in the grand hall, its silvered surface clouded with age, reflecting the dim light like a murky pool. In the photograph, barely discernible in the gloom, I thought I saw a shape in the reflection that wasn't mine. I zoomed in, my breath catching in my throat. It was too grainy, too distorted to be certain. There was Elias Thorne's solace found in this house, or was he a victim of it, just as I was beginning to suspect I might be? The harsh fluorescent hum of the laundromat at 4 a.m., one machine running on empty, did little to soothe the raw ache in my gut. My fingers, clumsy and stiff, traced the damp seam of my duffel. The metallic tang I'd caught earlier, sharp and coppery, had faded, replaced by the suffocating scent of stale detergent and the faint, unsettling perfume of the other patron. I hadn't seen them, not really, just a shadow by the vending machine, a rustle of plastic, but their presence had been a prickle on my skin, a warning. My breath hitched. I'd left the house. I'd driven, the tires spitting gravel on the long, winding driveway, the skeletal branches of the ancient oaks clawing at the headlights. I'd needed air. I'd needed to escape the oppressive silence that had settled over the mansion after the last incident. The one with the portraits. Their eyes, I swore, had followed me. Their painted smiles had contorted into something predatory. I'd slammed my bedroom door, the wood groaning like a wounded animal, and fled. Who could I even tell? Who would believe me? My aunt's lawyer, a man whose voice was as dry as old parchment, had been dismissive. A grand old house, Raj, full of character. Character. He'd clearly never felt the floorboards shift beneath his feet when no one was there. He'd never heard the faint, melodic humming that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I yanked the zipper of my bag further, the metal rasping. Inside, nestled amongst my hastily packed clothes, was the small, tarnished silver locket. Aunt Alara's locket. It was heavy, intricately engraved with swirling patterns that seemed to writhe in the dim light. The will had been explicit. The locket holds the key to understanding. Understanding what? A low, guttural groan emanated from the washing machine, not the usual mechanical complaint, but something deeper, more resonant. It vibrated through the linoleum floor, up my legs, settling in my chest like a stone. My gaze snapped to the vending machine. My heart, a traitorous organ, began to thrum a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I told myself it was just the late hour, the exhaustion, the residual adrenaline from my panicked escape. The air grew thicker, heavier, as if the very atmosphere was being drawn into the whirring machine. I reached into my bag, my fingers brushing against the cool metal of the locket. I pulled it out, its weight a surprising comfort. The swirling pattern seemed to pulse, catching the flickering light. As I turned it over in my palm, a faint, almost imperceptible warmth spread from it, so faint I almost missed it, carried on a draft that didn't exist. Mine. It wasn't a sound, not exactly. It was more of a thought, planted directly into my mind. A possessive, ancient claim. My hand trembled, the locket slipping slightly. I caught it, my grip tight. The washing machine cycle ended with a violent shudder. The water drained with a gurgling sigh. I could hear my own ragged breathing, loud in the sudden quiet. I stood, my legs unsteady, and walked towards the machine. I needed to see. I needed proof that this was real, that I wasn't losing my mind. I peered through the thick glass of the drum. It was empty. Of course, it was empty. The water had drained. It wasn't lint. It wasn't soap scum. Earth, like freshly turned soil after a rain, but wrong, rotten. My stomach lurched. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the leg of a folding chair. I braced myself against a cold metal folding table, the sensation of the smooth, worn surface a grounding anchor. I looked at the locket in my hand. The patterns seemed to shift, coalescing into something recognizable, a doorway, a gaping maw. You belong to me now, Raj. The voice, if it could be called that, was not human. It was the sigh of the wind through ancient trees, the groan of timbers under immense pressure, the hungry murmur of the earth. It was the house. The house was speaking, and it wanted me. I looked down at my hands, still clutching the locket. The smell of damp fabric softener was gone, replaced by that same cloying scent of decay and damp earth. I was miles from the mansion, yet I felt its presence like a physical weight. It had followed me, or perhaps it had never let me leave at all. The washing machine, now silent and still, seemed to watch me with its blank glass eye. The light bulb above flickered again, a dying ember. Was I truly alone in this place? The locket felt cold, impossibly cold, against my palm. It wasn't just the metal. It was a chill that seeped into my bones, a frigid breath from somewhere deep within the house. I had to get out. The thought was a frantic bird trapped in my chest. Out, away from this suffocating embrace. I scrambled from the dusty floor of the study, my knees protesting, my breath ragged. I needed air, real air, not the stale, cloying atmosphere of this place. I needed to see the sky, to feel the solid ground beneath my feet, unburdened by the weight of this house. My eyes landed on the heavy oak door of the study. It was always locked from the outside, a detail I'd dismissed as an oddity of the will of a reclusive owner. Now it felt like a cage. I lunged for the ornate brass handle, twisting it with all my might. Nothing. It was as if the metal had fused, the mechanism seized by some unseen force. I slammed my shoulder against the wood, the impact jarring my teeth. The door shuddered but held firm. I backed away, my gaze sweeping the room. The bookshelves, laden with leather-bound volumes that seemed to watch me, offered no escape. The large, draped windows were sealed shut, the glass thick and grimy, obscuring any view of the outside world. It was as if the house had decided I was its property and it wasn't about to let me go. My mind raced. The will, the wealth. It was a lure, a trap, and I, a fool, had walked right into it. The cryptic phrases about legacy and true inheritance now echoed with a sinister resonance. The house was the inheritance, and it was alive. I stumbled out of the study into the cavernous main hall. The grand staircase, usually a silent sentinel, seemed to creak with a new, mocking cadence. The portraits on the walls, their painted eyes following my every move, now held expressions of cruel amusement. I could feel the house watching me, dissecting my fear. My apartment. I needed to go back to my apartment, just for a little while, to reclaim a semblance of normalcy, to gather my thoughts. I remembered the spare key I'd left hidden in the small stone gargoyle by the front gate. A foolish precaution, I'd thought at the time. Now it felt like a lifeline. I reached the massive front doors, the same ones I'd struggled to open on my first day here. They were heavy, banded with iron, and unyielding. I'd never managed to lock them from the inside. I pushed. They didn't budge. I pulled. They remained stubbornly shut. My breath hitched. Then I heard it. A faint, metallic clinking. It came from the small alcove beside the doors, where a suit of ancient armor stood sentinel. I'd never paid it much attention, another relic of a bygone era. But now the sound was distinct, rhythmic, clink. My eyes darted to the armor. The gauntlet on its left hand was slowly, deliberately moving. It was reaching out, not towards me, but towards the wall, towards a section of the ornate wallpaper. The gauntlet withdrew, and a small, tarnished silver key dropped onto the polished floor with a soft chime. My heart leaped. It was the key to the back door, the one I'd lost somewhere in the overgrown gardens, or so I'd believed. This was too convenient, too orchestrated. The house was playing with me. It was offering a false hope, a distraction. Still, desperation gnawed at me. I snatched the key. It felt warm, strangely so, like it had been held for a long time. The door was smaller, less imposing than the front, but equally solid. I fumbled with the lock, my hands trembling. The key slid in. It turned. The door swung inward with a groan that sounded like a choked sob. Fresh air, blessed, cool air. I practically fell through the opening, my lungs burning with the effort. I was in the garden, the tangled, overgrown garden I'd barely explored. I didn't stop to look back. I ran, through the thorny bushes, over uneven ground. My only thought to reach the gate, to reach the road, to reach anywhere but here. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. My feet stumbled on unseen roots. A branch whipped across my face, drawing a thin line of blood. I could hear it behind me. Not footsteps, not a chase. It was a sound that was both everywhere and nowhere. The rustling of leaves that was too loud, too insistent. The wind, picking up, carrying with it the faint, unsettling scent of ozone. I burst through the rusted gate, its hinges screaming in protest. The gravel road stretched before me, a pale ribbon under the weak moonlight. I ran, my lungs screaming, my legs burning. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel it, the house. Its gaze, a heavy weight on my back, urging me to return. Then I saw it, a light, a faint flickering glow in the distance, a building, and with it a sound, the low, rhythmic hum of machinery, a laundromat, at 4 a.m. It was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. I stumbled towards it, my entire being focused on that beacon of artificial light. The hum grew louder, a steady, reassuring drone. I reached the glass doors, my reflection a gaunt, wild-eyed stranger staring back. Inside, a single washing machine spun, a solitary sentinel in the dimly lit space. The air inside was warm, smelling faintly of detergent and damp fabric. It was mundane. It was normal. I collapsed against the door, my body shaking. I was safe. I was out. The house hadn't stopped me. It had let me go. Why? And if it was willing to let me leave, what did it truly want? The locket lay heavy in my hand, a shard of ice in the muggy air of the laundromat at 4 a.m., one machine running on empty. Its surface, usually a dull silver, seemed to absorb the weak fluorescent light, reflecting nothing back. The chill it radiated wasn't of this world, or at least not of the world I thought I knew. It pulsed, a slow, deliberate beat against my skin, mirroring the uneven thrum of the lone washing machine. It was the same chill that had seeped from the walls of the mansion, from the dusty portraits, from the very air I breathed within those decaying halls. I'd come here, to this sterile, linoleum-floored purgatory, because the house had driven me out. Not physically, not with a shove or a roar, but with a subtler, more insidious kind of expulsion. The phone lines had gone dead days ago, a fuzzy hiss answering every desperate attempt to connect. The car, my only link to the outside, had sputtered and died on the long, winding driveway, the engine refusing to even cough. They spoke of my failures, my regrets, the gnawing insecurities I'd buried so deep I thought they were forgotten. The house was feeding. I'd driven until I found the neon glow of this all-night haven for the forgotten. For those who lived on the fringes of the sleeping world, the washing machine churned, a lonely, monotonous rhythm. I watched the clothes tumble, a blur of faded colors, each rotation a mockery of my own spiraling descent. My gaze drifted to the warped reflection in the glass door of the churning machine. It wasn't my face I saw. I blinked, and my own reflection snapped back into place, but the image lingered, a phantom imprint on my retinas. You can't escape what you are. Raj, it knows, it always knows. What did it know? My deepest fears, my most shameful secrets. The locket in my hand pulsed again, a surge of icy energy that made my teeth ache. I could feel the house even from here, its tendrils reaching out, a psychic tether that refused to break. It was a hunger, a vast, insatiable hunger that had lain dormant for decades, perhaps centuries, and I had stumbled right into its maw. I gripped the locket tighter, my grip tight. The urge to throw it, to shatter it against the tiled floor, was almost overwhelming. But a deeper instinct, a desperate flicker of defiance held me back. This was not just a house, it was a trap, and the locket, I suspected, was a key to what I didn't dare to imagine. The washing machine cycle ended with a jarring click. My breath hitched. The air in the laundromat, which had seemed stale and used, now felt thin, as if all the oxygen had been leached away. I looked at my reflection again, and this time I saw it. A pinprick of malevolent light, a flicker of something ancient and predatory. It was watching me, and it knew I was afraid. But I could feel the house, its presence, a heavy blanket settling over me, pulling me back. It wasn't just a place, it was a consciousness, and it was actively seeking to consume me. The locket vibrated, a low hum that resonated deep within my bones. It was a summons, a challenge. The cold seeped through the soles of my worn sneakers, a chill that had nothing to do with the early morning air. The laundromat at 4 a.m., one machine running on empty. It was the only place I could think of, the only place that felt neutral. A place of transition, of things being cleaned, washed away. I needed to wash something away. The fluorescent lights hummed, a sickly yellow buzzing that grated on my nerves. The air hung thick with the ghost of fabric softener and stale detergent. My breath plumed in front of me, a stark white cloud against the drab linoleum. The single washing machine, its drum spinning with nothing but air, was a mocking echo of the chaos inside me. The locket. It was still in my pocket, its metal cold against my thigh. I pulled it out, the intricate silver swirling like frozen smoke. The will had mentioned it. The key to understanding, the heart of what remains. What remained? A hunger, a vast, insatiable hunger that had been gnawing at the edges of my sanity since I stepped foot into Blackwood Manor. I tried to rationalize. Old houses creak, wind whistles, loneliness plays tricks. They were too specific. They knew things, not just things I'd told myself, but things I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten them myself. The shame of that summer job, the fear of heights that had paralyzed me on the Ferris wheel as a child, burning embarrassment of my first rejection. And then there were the visions, flickering images in the periphery, gone when I turned to look. The constant, gnawing sense of being watched, of being wanted. Raj, not by the house, but by something else. A counter voice, a faint echo of myself trying to break through the din. It was that voice that had led me here, to this sterile, humming purgatory between the manor's suffocating embrace and the world I'd been so effectively cut off from. The phone lines dead, the car refusing to start, the roads, when I dared to venture out, twisting back on themselves, leading me right to the manor gates again. I ran a hand over the locket. It was warm now, a subtle heat blooming against my palm. The metal seemed to shift, the swirling patterns deepening, almost as if they were breathing. Foolish boy, you think you can escape? We are bound, you and I. No, not we. It, the house. Entity that had festered within its walls for centuries. My grandfather, the distant relative, had been the last. The will was a trap, a lure. The wealth was a lie. The true inheritance was this possession. I stood up, the cold floor no longer an issue. The laundromat was a temporary reprieve, a place to gather my thoughts before the inevitable. The entity wanted me to break, to succumb, to become another whisper in its endless, echoing halls. But my grandfather's desk, the locket. They were clues not to escape, perhaps, but to understanding, to fighting back. I remembered the feeling when I first touched the locket in the hidden compartment. A surge of energy, yes, but also recognition. A faint, almost imperceptible pull, as if the locket wasn't just a key but a conduit, a link. We know your every weakness, we will feast. I gripped the locket tighter. It wasn't just a key, it was part of it, part of me. My grandfather hadn't just left me the house. He'd left me a piece of himself, and a piece of whatever had claimed him. The single washing machine shuddered, its empty drum rattling against the glass. My heart leaped, a frantic bird against my ribs, but I didn't flinch. The washing machine settled into its rhythmic, empty churn. I looked down at the locket in my hand. The house was waiting. It had anticipated my defiance. It would be stronger now. But I had something it didn't expect, not just fear, but a dawning, terrible understanding. I took a deep, steadying breath, the scent of stale detergent suddenly sharp and real, distant, manageable. What if the locket wasn't a weapon but a mirror? What if the house wasn't trying to consume me, but to remind me of something I'd forgotten about myself? What if the key to Blackwood Manor wasn't to destroy it, but to finally, truly understand what it was that it wanted? And more importantly, what did I want? The air in the laundromat at 4 a.m., one machine running on empty, tasted of stale detergent and something metallic like old pennies. It clung to my tongue. The rhythmic thrum of the solitary washing machine, its drum churning with nothing but air and ghosts of forgotten fabrics, was the only sound. It was a sound I'd come to associate with stillness, with the quiet aftermath of everything. My fingers traced the cool, worn metal of the locket. It lay heavy in my palm, a solid weight against the gnawing emptiness that had settled in my gut. The warmth it had offered, that fleeting sensation of connection, had long since faded, leaving behind only the cold reality of its presence. It wasn't a solution. It was a reminder, a brand, Blackwood Manor. The name itself felt like a whisper of rot. I saw it in my mind's eye, a hulking silhouette against a bruised, twilight sky. The dust motes dancing in the slivers of moonlight that pierced its grimy panes. It was still there, I knew it was, but it wasn't mine anymore, not in the way I'd once believed. The locket had been the key, yes, not to the wealth, not to freedom, but to understanding, to seeing the truth of what my grandfather had been bound to. A parasitic entity feeding on memory, on fear, on the very essence of those who dared to call the manor home. He hadn't been a victim, not entirely. He had been a custodian, a keeper of the lock, and now that duty, that burden had been passed to me. The will had been a cruel jest. Immense wealth, the greatest fortune, was the knowledge of how to survive it, how to contain it. The locket, imbued with a fragment of my grandfather's will, his desperate final act of defiance, was the only thing that had kept the manor from swallowing me whole. It was a tether, a shield, and a constant, agonizing ache. I'd left the manor, not by choice, but by necessity. The locket had shown me the path, not through the grand oak doors, but through the forgotten service tunnels, the crumbling cellars, the places where the manor's breath was weakest. The laundromat at 4 a.m., one machine running on empty, was my sanctuary, a neutral space. I'd found it by chance, a beacon of fluorescent light on a desolate stretch of highway, and I'd stayed. I'd found a small room above a shuttered bakery, and I'd come here, to this place of ceaseless, pointless motion, to wash away the clinging scent of decay. But the decay wasn't just in the air, it was in me. The locket felt heavier each day. It was like a phantom limb, a constant, dull ache of what had been and what could still be. My grandfather's final message, etched into the locket's silver, had been clear. The lock must hold. The bloodline is the key. I was the bloodline, I was the key, and the lock was Blackwood Manor. I hadn't destroyed the entity, I had merely contained it. Resealed the breach. The price of that containment was my own isolation. I couldn't go back, not ever. The locket would prevent it, and even if it didn't, the memory of what lay within was a cage far stronger than any stone wall. A loose button on my shirt snagged on the rough fabric of my jeans. I pulled at it, the small, sharp pain a welcome distraction. Raj, that was my name, a name that felt increasingly alien. The Raj who had arrived at Blackwood Manor, eager and naive, was gone. This Raj was a survivor, a prisoner of his own inheritance. The washing machine sputtered, then fell silent. The sudden quiet was deafening. For a moment I held my breath, listening for anything. The wind outside, the distant wail of a siren, the soft scuttling of a rat in the alley. Nothing, just the stillness of the laundromat at 4 a.m., one machine running on empty, its cycle complete. I stood up, the locket still clutched in my hand. The metal was cool now, its brief warmth a forgotten memory. I knew I had to leave. This place, this temporary haven, was no longer safe. The entity was patient. It had waited centuries. It could wait longer, and it would always be watching, always probing, always seeking a way back. It wasn't the wind. It was closer. It was familiar. There was the lock truly holding, or had I merely become its new keeper, forever bound to a decaying legacy?